In the town of Cheesebridge, when all good citizens are safe inside, beastly creatures roam the night.
Boxtrolls! Boxtrolls are monsters!
At least, that's what everyone's been told. Welcome to the magical world of the Boxtrolls, where one lucky boy lives happily with his unusual family. They transform treasures into incredible inventions. Careful never to be seen.
Who's there?
By human eyes.
I want every Boxtroll gone.
Let's go! Who are you, boy?
I'm a Boxtroll.
Then let's see you fit in your box.
Please help us.
You need to look like a proper boy. Yes. Yes. No. When you meet someone, you must look them in the eye and shake hands. What are you doing?
Boxtroll, come out, come out.
No more hiding, right?
Right. I will destroy every last Boxtroll in this town.
Grab hold! Stand up for yourselves. Don't be afraid anymore. This way. Pleasure to meet you. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Never seen one do that before.
The Boxtrolls.
Off with the box.
Please welcome the directors of the Boxtrolls to the stage. So we have Graham to my left and Anthony to my right. Now I'm going to get the gushing out of the way. I'm not lying when I say that this is my favorite animated film of the year. I thought it was a wondrous, spectacular achievement, and I urge everyone here to go and check it out. Now my first question for you guys is, the film really has a timeless quality to me. I mean, watching it kind of brought me back to the Disney films of yore. Were you going for that with this film?
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, I've worked on all three films at LAIKA, Coraline, Paranorman, and the Boxtrolls, and I think something that is in the DNA of all three of them is that, you know, Travis Knight, the president of the company, he really wants the movies we make to harken back to those classic days of Disney with Bambi and Pinocchio and Dumbo. He wants the movies that we make to have the highs and the lows that those films had. You know, we don't shy away from going to the dark, scary places to get to those really high light places, and I feel like the Boxtrolls really has that in it.
A large part of that timeless quality, for me anyways, comes from the sense of humor in the film. It's so childlike and doesn't really, you know, go out of its way to appeal to the older set like so many animated films nowadays, I find. It's not self-referential, which is so refreshing. Did that aspect of the project appeal to you guys?
Yeah, you know, a lot of it has the tone of the Alan Snow book, Here Be Monsters. You know, we used to pitch it that it's like Oliver Twist as if it was made by Monty Python. And so it wouldn't have been appropriate to have a lot of contemporary references in the humor there. So we avoided them. We try to avoid them, you know, as a rule, sort of at the company. But yeah, it definitely has the humor that comes out of the characters. When we first recorded Nick Frost and Richard Ayoade, we knew that they were funny and they were a funny duo and we liked the quality of their voices, but we recorded them the first time together and they had this great repartee back and forth, especially the pauses and the odd little inclinations Richard Ayoade would put into it. So those two guys, they actually got funnier as we recorded them more and more and we gave them more space. And then once we had the whole cast put together, and when you put the cast together, you kind of want it like putting an orchestra together. You want to fulfill, it's the drums and the horns and stuff. And there was a missing element. And when it was suggested to bring in Tracy Morgan, that was sort of the missing piece that we hadn't had before. And he did a great job.
Really transforms himself into that character. I had no idea it was Tracy Morgan until the credits rolled.
Well, he did such an excellent English accent.
He really does. He really does. Now, can I ask you guys a really green question? Who here is a director in the audience? Do we have anyone? No. Okay. And we have no animation directors, obviously, in the audience. I've interviewed many a filmmaker of a live action feature, but I've never interviewed an animation director. So can you explain to those listening exactly, try to distill it is what you do as a director of a film like The Boxtrolls?
Well, specifically a stop motion animation director is even a whole different ball of wax even onto that side of it, because I know we've described it. I mean, making a stop motion feature, anything stop motion animated, combines pretty much all the worst aspects of live action and animation together, and you really don't get any of the benefits. You can't shoot any extra coverage, you can't do multiple takes, and unlike other forms of animation, it really isn't an iterative process. I, as a director, first time out, I had never anticipated how intense the conversations were going to be when we have to launch the animator to do the shot. Because when you're doing it hand-drawn or you're doing it CG, not that it's easy, animation is always hard no matter what form it takes, but you get a chance as a director to be with the animator on frequent visits, and you can kind of whittle a performance, you can hone it down, you can keep removing drawings, you can keep pulling frames and rethink and redo it each time. Stop motion, you kind of only get one shot at it. And so it's our 18 months of our shooting schedule is kind of like having opening night every day. I mean, there's a certain kinship to like theater performance, because you're going to get what you're going to get in front of that camera on that one shot that the animator goes to do it. So it's a little insane.
Did you have anxiety every day on set going
for 18 months?
Set? 18 months
I'm
of
only
anxiety.
32 years old. We shared editing rooms right next to each other, and they were like prison cells. It's like that scene in Papillon where you'd stick your head through the hole and say, "How do I look?"
It's amazing that the end result is so pleasurable given the hell you guys had to go through to make this film. So I was told that the LAIKA studio itself, it kind of resembles an airport hangar, if you will. Is that an apt?
Yeah, it's just a big nondescript industrial building outside of Portland in a small town called Hillsborough. And from the outside, it doesn't look any different than the rest of the Intel buildings that are all there in the Silicon Forest.
Except inside you have a bunch of artists.
You have a bunch of grown men playing with dolls in the dark, and all the women who work there are welders. So it's basically where all the people from Burning Man go in the off-season.
Now, within this big space, I mean, you have so many things going on simultaneously. You're not just shooting one scene at a time. Otherwise, these films would take
there's 55
centuries
sets
to make.
Yeah, 55 sets going at any one time, separated by big black tarps to keep the light out. Each one with their own little set and a number of puppets on it, and then about 25 animators, because there's usually a set that the animator is working on and the next set that's being prepared for him to move to. The animators never get a free moment.
Yeah, and I mean, they don't get a free moment because on average, a stop-motion animator can get about 35, 40 frames a day done. And so if he's lucky, by the end of the week, he's done about 4 seconds of footage. And so, yeah, we have as many pistons firing as we can at all times to do 18 months of making the film to get 90 minutes of actual film at the end of it. There's not a minute wasted.
So what's your day-to-day in there? I'm guessing you're just constantly scurrying about from one set to the next.
Yeah, that's, the animation process for stop motion starts the same way it stopped for every animated film. We do a story reel, and then we spend a year or two doing that, where we storyboard out the entire movie and we record the voices. We need all the final voices first before we can prepare the sequences for the animators. So once we hit that 18 months of production, me and Graham have been working together for 2 years coming up with the story, and we're all on the same base when it starts there. And at that point, we can separate more. We have 2 editorial rooms where we watch dailies all day because the film's shot digitally. We don't have to wait for film to come back. And then we'll sort of divvy up the movie at that point. So we get to work at about 6:30 in the morning, and we meet for an hour, and we plan out, what are you doing today, and what am I doing today? Then we separate, go out to deal with our individual sequences and individual animators. And then during the day, you visit the art department and all the VFX department. Then we get back together for lunch, and then get back together after everybody's gone home, and we have a crossover meeting there where we say, all right, what did you do to sequence 1350, and what did I do to sequence 2800?
Yes, Tony and I have seen a lot of each other in the last few years.
I'm sure. Well, I'm so fascinated because this is the first time you two have worked together, if I'm not mistaken. Did LAIKA have you two do a chemistry test before you started making the film just to make sure you could work together?
Not that well planned out.
No, it kind of happened naturally. I worked as a storyboard artist on Coraline and on Paranorman. And for me, I just got a little breather while I was in the middle of storyboarding on Paranorman, where I got a chance to help out some of the things that were in development. And this guy, Tony, was working on the Here Be Monsters story, and he handed me a sequence that had absolutely no dialogue in it. It was this, at the time, it was the two Boxtrolls, Fish and Shoe, finding a little baby in the trash. And not a single line of dialogue in it. It all had to be worked out visually and pantomime and expressions. And for the kind of stuff that I've done there and my own like personal films and stuff, it was like a dream come true. I mean, I got to work it all out with just sound effects and create this little connection between the baby and the Boxtrolls. That sequence kind of, at the time, became the thing that Tony realized and Travis realized they wanted to do with the film. So I had anticipated boarding on Boxtrolls and suddenly found myself in a co-director chair beside him. So it was a little surprising for me.
Now, the Boxtrolls themselves, their language is adorable and hilarious as well, and very, very endearing. How did you guys come up with it? And is it a language, like James Cameron did for Avatar, or is it just a bunch of noises that sound cute?
When we started out, we wrote a language for them, and we anticipated someday being able to, translate the Bible into Boxtroll. But as soon as we heard it, it felt more like the Klingons. They felt too alien, the language coming out of them. So we didn't particularly care for it that way, so we went to our two voice artists, Steve Bloom and Dee Baker, who are really great guys who work in a lot of animated films in Los Angeles, and they'd had a lot of experience coming up with creature voices. So we talked to them and said they should feel a little bit more animalistic. They should feel like animals, although they have their own words for things. So Dee and Steve, all they needed was we would pitch them the sequence and tell them the most emotive moments in the sequence, and they would come up with sounds that could fit that moment. So if it was curiosity or anger or fear, I always felt that they should act like, or sound like a bunch of raccoons arguing over the trash. And then Dee and Steve felt it was useful occasionally at certain times to have little English words speak into it, or even they would put in these Eastern European words here and there. So they felt like they were something more than animals, but something less than aliens and stuff. So it came down to interacting with Steve and Dee and getting hours and hours of Boxtroll dialogue that we could choose from and cut it together.
Yeah, I always kind of felt sorry for our editors because, we would be putting the story reel together and we'd be going, there's got to be a little bit more of there must be a fish sound with just a little more snarl in there. And those poor guys would have to spend, hours combing through this massive database with no way of really categorizing it other than just sort of generalities, and have to, go through all of these takes to figure out what was the most snarly take. It was kind of an insane job.
You guys ever attempted to make the Boxtroll sounds yourself?
Well, actually, Graham does do the voice of one of the Boxtrolls.
Really?
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Can you give us a little sampling?
Which Boxtroll?
I don't know if people will be able to guess it, but I did the hum, 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 which happened to belong to Wheels.
Yes, the Boxtroll that has a unicycle and always makes his own sound effects as if he's riding a Harley motorcycle.
Awesome, awesome. And with that, we're going to open it up to the audience. If you have a question, please just raise your hand, and I'll point in your direction. Yeah. Sorry, wait for the mic.
You guys working with people like Richard Iowade, who's had some extensive background working as directors, was it even more collaboration than just between you two and with the actors that had that experience?
Funnily enough, when you work with a voice talent who's also been a director, they're the best people to work with, and they don't try to do anything but act because they've had to deal with actors themselves. So Richard was actually exactly as you would think he would be. That's his voice that he uses all the time. He's the nicest guy. It's funny that when we pitched the idea of using Richard to Travis and other people at the studio, they didn't know who he was. As soon as we cut his voice next to Nick Frost's voice from different shows that they've done, everybody loved the voice, but they didn't know who he was. And then when we were at Comic-Con and they were listing the names of all the cast, it was funny. There was applause for everybody. There was a huge cheer when Richard Ayoade's come up. So it was a Comic-Con pleasing choice of Richard Ayoade. He's just a really nice guy to work with, and his time, like I said, working with Nick Frost and stuff made us expand that Pickles character a lot.
Yeah, and you could definitely tell he had had the director background, because he was, during any of the downtime during the sessions, he was always asking us questions about the whole process of stop motion and how is it done and how are you going to, so he was very interested in how the whole thing worked.
Although Nick Frost, on the other hand, had one of the most frightening parts of the job. When the first time he came to record, he had on a T-shirt that had an image on it, and I didn't know what it was. And when I asked him what it was, he got a really dark look on his face, and he said that I have to give up my geek card because it turned out to be the Luke Skywalker targeting computer from the first Star Wars. And the fact that I didn't know it sort of totally undermined me as a director.
Hi, I had a question. Is this your first stop animation film that you guys have made, or have you made other ones in the past?
Well, I mean, I storyboarded on Coraline and Paranorman, and I guess in a sense it's my third film out, but as much as I thought I knew what was involved in the process when I was in the story department, I don't feel like I really knew until making this film.
Years ago, when I lived in the Bay Area, I worked on a little tiny bit on Nightmare Before Christmas and on James and the Giant Peach with one of the great stop-motion directors, Henry Selick. And I worked for him for a while, so I was able to observe him making these kind of movies for quite a long time. So that was it. But nope, this is the first one I've directed.
Hi, thank you for coming. I'm wondering what each of your favorite animated movies are and why.
It's a hard question, and I got a lot of favorites. It isn't technically a movie, but I do feel like the one animated short that got me to get into the world of animation was, I grew up in Canada, and so I guess I saw more than my fair share of NFB films, but there was one called The Big Snit by Richard Conde back in like the mid-80s, and I still think it's one of the funniest pieces of entertainment that's ever been made, and that was when I realized that was what I wanted to do. Big Snit.
It's a famous, funny Canadian film. No, for me, one of the earliest memories I have is King Kong, the original King Kong. It's one of the movies that I loved, and King Kong was done stop motion in that film. And then for me, growing up outside of Boston, I used to see the animation celebrations. They used to travel around and show animation from all over the world. And there were a couple of animated artists from Europe and Canada that I loved. There's a Russian animator named Yuri Norstein who used to do incredibly elaborate but beautiful films of cutout animation. And Frederick Bach is a French-Canadian animator who did these really beautiful films called Crack and The Man Who Planted Trees. And we grew up seeing the Warner Brothers cartoons and Disney cartoons and loving them, but those opened up a whole new world of these more artistic, a bit more adult animated films that could be made.
Go Canada. I'm Canadian, so I'm a little biased.
Setting up 55 scenes at a time sounds crazy. How do you plan from a logistics and timing perspective?
The first time I visited LAIKA, I saw something that I'd first seen and I think was actually invented by that stop-motion director I told you about, Henry Selick. It was called The Big Boards. There's a whole room, almost as big as this room we're in here, where the walls are covered with particle board, and the entire job, every single day and every single set is mapped out for the entire 18 months. So you'll know that on set Blue 8, we're going to start out with the Market Square set, and it's going to be there for 2 weeks. And then for the first part of the week, they're going to be dressing it. For the second part of the week, the animator's going to be animating, and then the animator who's there is going to move to this room. And it's almost like a giant spreadsheet, but it's put up on the walls with little cards put in with thumbtacks so that as soon as things change, and they change every day, they can move them around. So it's a logistical nightmare. It's like planning a huge battle every week. And they put it on the big board so everybody in the company can come in and stand in the middle of the room and they can address what's going to happen next.
Yeah, it's something, again, in the story department I'd never really thought about too much, but once directing this thing, I realized that with stop motion, it's all physical assets, and there are only so many of them. And
you can't download a new Eggs puppet,
Yeah, so the production guys were always sweating it because, as inevitably happens, certain shots start to take a little longer than had been planned, and all of a sudden that just has a domino effect through the whole schedule because suddenly the eggs that was supposed to be done on Blue 8 isn't ready for Green 14 yet, and then that leaves everything else hanging in the balance, and it was, I mean, every day those guys battled that.
And it's constantly surprising. And when we were making the film, there's a few big action sequences. There's the chase across the rooftops, and then there's the battle at the end of the movie where Snatcher's machine, the giant mecha drill, attacks the city. Those are the ones that we sort of thought would be the most difficult ones to do. But little do we know that the sequence that was by far the most difficult scene was the dance sequence, was the waltz with all those puppets. That sequence took all 18 months to do, and in the end, it's less than 2 minutes on the screen.
I have a question. You have a lot of big names as the voices, right? Sir Ben Kingsley, to mention Tracy Morgan. How do you approach these actors to participate in something like this? Do you appeal to their kids, or something like Tracy? I guess he's kind of silly, but what's that whole mentality of?
That is a good way. If they have children, you can do that. I don't actually know about how they're approached financially, but the way we put together the cast is we start with eggs.
Yeah, I mean, I feel really lucky with the eclectic cast that we ended up with, because for Tony and I mean, we had our little wish list of who we wanted for each character, and we pretty much got everybody we'd initially set out to get. But I mean, as far as how they're approached, the script is usually what draws them in or doesn't draw them into the film.
And then what you usually do is you take your hero and you try to get his voice first. So we knew we liked Isaac Hempstead Wright immediately from some of his performance on Game of Thrones. So as soon as we got his voice, we would take clips out of the Game of Thrones episodes and any interviews we could find with Isaac, and then we would just put them up in editorial with an image of his face and then his whole body and say, does that feel right? Does he have the right quality of naivete and stuff? Because sometimes you'll really love an actor, and what you're loving about him is the way he moves physically and stuff. So you just need to listen to the voice alone. So as soon as we agreed on Isaac, then we got Elle Fanning, who was a friend of the studio because her sister had been in Coraline, and then we cut them. Even though the conversation makes no sense, we pull dialogue from her movies and his, and we cut them together and see, does that feel good? Does that feel right for those two characters? And then that's how you do it for the whole film. You just sort of build up this orchestra of voices.
We used a bunch of clips of Don Logan from Sexy Beast cut against Isaac.
Yelling at poor Bran Stark from Game of Thrones and Elle Fanning from Super 8. And it makes no sense, the dialogue, but it has a feeling of, you can tell who everybody is, because that's the only way to know.
I have a quick question about the vocal performers. One thing I love about LAIKA, among many, is the fact that it seems to be, so popular these days for big studio houses, animation houses, to employ celebrities, name talent to, drive the ticket buyers to see the film. But with LAIKA, I feel that you guys really, really go for the people that are right for the job, for the voice, for the character. I mean, you have Elle Fanning, like you said, in this, but Richard Ayoade, I mean, I'm sure not many people in America are familiar with who he is. How good, I don't know, how much of a security blanket does that give you guys?
Most animation directors would prefer to go in that direction. The reason you go to actors and big actors is because they can act. You don't have to go to celebrities. We mostly don't have to, because the CEO of our company is an animator. Travis is one of our lead animators, and he's loved animation, his whole life. And as an animator, he knows that for him to do a good performance, he needs the best acting, the best actor. He says that we don't really go for cartoony voices, and we don't want the actors to make up a voice that much and to make it too much more cartoony than it already is. And when we recorded Sir Ben Kingsley, at first we thought his voice, the performance was, I was afraid it might be a little bit too mannered, but a little bit too weird, but Travis loved it when he heard it, because as an animator, he could immediately visualize what he was going to do with that sequence, with that vocal performance. So it's very important to him that the quality of the performance be that way, and not just a sort of celebrity-driven equation.
I don't think Elle Fanning's even on the poster, right? No.
Winnie is, the character she plays.
Winnie's on there.
Yeah.
She's what?
Winnie is on the poster, yeah.
Okay.
Little girl, yeah.
The girl, yeah, but I'm saying her name.
Oh, you mean the name?
Or the name, yeah. You'll see that in a lot of other, animation places. Any more questions from the audience? No? Well, thank you so much, you both. And the film comes out this Friday. Please be sure to check it out. And thank you again for taking part.
Thank you.